The F-22 Raptors screamed across the Arabian Peninsula at 37,000 feet, their stealth profiles cutting through the thin air like ghosts made of titanium and vengeance. 4 aircraft in diamond formation, call signs Venom 1 through Venom 4, each carrying enough ordnance to level a city block. The mission briefing had been crystal clear. Eliminate the high-value target compound before enemy forces could extract their leadership. Clean, surgical, devastating. But Major Kinsley, Matchstick Thorn, flying as Venom 3, had learned long ago that nothing in warfare ever went according to the briefing slides. 23 years of military service had taught her to trust her instincts more than her orders, and right now, something felt catastrophically wrong about this entire operation. The encrypted radio crackled to life in her helmet. Venom Flight, this is Overlord. Target is hot, repeat, target is hot. Cleared to engage in 30 seconds. The voice belonged to some colonel sitting in an air-conditioned bunker 2,000 miles away, probably sipping coffee while ordering the deaths of unknown souls below. Kinsley's gloved fingers tightened on the stick as she adjusted her position in the formation. Through her canopy, the desert stretched endlessly, a canvas of amber and shadow painted by the dying sun. She'd flown over terrain like this in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, places where the line between combatant and civilian blurred like heat shimmer off burning sand. Venom 2 to Venom 3, you seeing that? Lieutenant Colonel Marcus, Sledge, Morrison's voice cut through the tactical frequency, tinged with confusion. Kinsley's eyes swept across her instruments, then to the landscape below. That's when she saw it, a tiny flicker of light, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from what appeared to be a civilian aircraft on the ground near the target zone. The aircraft looked damaged, possibly crashed, but that light pattern. Her blood turned to ice water. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short again. An SOS. But not just any SOS distress signal. The timing, the precise intervals, the way the light cut through the gathering dusk. It was following the old Coast Guard rescue pattern she'd memorized during her early years as a search and rescue pilot. Before the wars, before she became a weapon instead of a savior. Overlord Venom 3, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surge. I'm seeing possible civilian distress signals in the target area. Request hold on weapons free. The radio silence stretched for exactly 4 seconds, long enough for doubt to creep into the minds of warriors who'd learned that hesitation meant death. When Overlord's response came, it carried the weight of institutional impatience. Negative, Venom 3. Intelligence confirms no friendlies in target zone. Continue to target. 15 seconds to weapons free. Kinsley's jaw clenched. 23 years of service, and they still treated her observations like suggestions from a junior enlisted. She'd earned her place in this cockpit through skill, determination, and more combat sorties than most pilots flew in their entire careers. Yet here she was, watching a potential rescue situation unfold while bureaucrats dismissed her concerns. The target compound materialized in her heads-up display, crosshairs settling over concrete buildings that looked identical to dozens of others she'd helped reduce to rubble. But that flickering light continued its desperate dance, a Morse code prayer ascending to the darkening sky where four angels of death prepared to deliver judgment. 10 seconds to weapons free, Overlord announced. Kinsley made a decision that would either save lives or end her career. A breaking formation, she transmitted, banking her Raptor hard to starboard. Investigating distress signal. The radio exploded with protests from her flight leader and control center. But Kinsley had already committed to her descent, diving toward the source of that rhythmic flicker, while her wingmen maintained their attack formation above. Through her targeting pod, she could see the aircraft more clearly now. A small civilian plane, definitely crashed, with what appeared to be survivors signaling desperately from beside the wreckage. As she dropped below 20,000 feet, details became clearer. The plane bore Red Cross markings, medical evacuation. Her targeting systems identified at least 6 heat signatures around the wreckage, human beings, not combatants, not terrorists, just people who'd been in the wrong place when their aircraft went down. Venom 1 to Venom 3, return to formation immediately, came the sharp command from Major Razor Kellerman, her flight leader and a man who'd never met a rule he wouldn't follow blindly. You're compromising mission integrity. Kinsley ignored the transmission and switched to guard frequency. Any aircraft in distress vicinity grid coordinates 77 Alpha Yankee Niner. This is United States Air Force Rescue. Do you copy? The response came immediately, tinged with desperation and hope. Air Force Rescue. This is Dr. Patricia Valdez with Médecins Sans Frontières. We've been down for 14 hours with wounded aboard. Please advise your intentions. Doctors Without Borders. Medical personnel. The very people she'd sworn to protect were about to become collateral damage in another precision strike against shadows and assumptions. Dr. Valdez, maintain your position. Help is coming. She switched back to tactical frequency, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned respect through fire and steel. Overlord, Venom 3. Confirmed civilian medical personnel at crash site grid 77 Alpha Yankee Niner. Mission abort recommended. The silence stretched longer this time, filled with the weight of career-ending decisions and the mathematics of acceptable losses. When Overlord responded, his voice carried the chill of institutional indifference. Negative abort, Venom 3. Medical personnel not confirmed by intelligence. Return to formation or face court-martial. Kinsley stared at the heat signatures below, each one representing a life hanging in the balance between military efficiency and human compassion. She thought about her daughter Emma, now 17, and planning to follow her mother's footsteps into the Air Force. What kind of military would Emma inherit if soldiers stopped being human beings? Venom 2 to Venom 3, Marcus Morrison's voice cut through her thoughts. I'm seeing the same distress patterns you identified. Looks legitimate. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. At least one other pilot recognized what she'd discovered. But recognition wouldn't stop the bombs that were already armed and ready to drop on predetermined coordinates that happened to include 6 innocent human beings. The desert below seemed to hold its breath as 4 F-22 Raptors circled above a crashed medical aircraft, each pilot wrestling with the eternal military paradox, following orders versus following conscience. Major Kinsley Thorne had spent 23 years learning to balance that equation. Tonight, she would discover which side carried more weight than her wings could bear. The tactical frequency crackled with terse exchanges between flight members and control centers, but beneath the professional military jargon, Kinsley could hear something else, the sound of doubt creeping into voices that had spoken with absolute certainty just minutes before. Doubt was dangerous in combat operations, but it was also human. It meant her fellow pilots were beginning to see what she'd recognized immediately. This mission was built on flawed intelligence and institutional momentum, rather than tactical necessity. Venom Flight, this is Overlord. You have authorization for weapons free. Execute strike package immediately. The order hung in the digital air like a sword of Damocles, waiting to fall on the innocent and guilty alike. 4 pilots, 4 consciences, 4 trigger fingers poised over the destruction of everything they'd sworn to protect. Kinsley closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, feeling the weight of her aircraft's weapons systems and the even heavier burden of moral choice. When she opened them again, she was no longer just Major Thorne following orders. She was Matchstick, the pilot who'd earned her call sign by lighting the way home for lost aircraft in impossible conditions. Tonight, she would light the way toward something more important than mission success. She would light the way toward doing the right thing, regardless of consequences. The first bomb bay doors opened with mechanical precision, revealing ordnance designed to eliminate targets with clinical efficiency. But before any weapons could release, Kinsley's voice cut through the radio frequencies with crystalline clarity. All Venom aircraft, this is Venom 3. I am declaring emergency override under Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Civilian lives are in immediate danger from friendly fire. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded either salvation or court-martial proceedings. Article 92, the regulation that allowed military personnel to disobey unlawful orders when civilian casualties were imminent. It was the nuclear option of military insubordination, and using it meant Kinsley was betting her entire career on being right about 6 heat signatures in the desert below. Venom 3, you are in direct violation of operational orders. Overlord's voice carried the fury of disrupted chains of command. Return to base immediately for disciplinary action. But something had shifted in the tactical frequency. Kinsley could hear it in the breathing patterns of her wingmen, the subtle changes in engine harmonics that indicated pilots adjusting their positions. Marcus Morrison was the first to break radio silence with support. Venom 2 concurs with Venom 3's assessment. Civilian medical personnel confirmed on ground. Then came Captain Phoenix Rodriguez in Venom 4. Medical aircraft clearly marked with Red Cross identifiers. Mission parameters appear compromised. Even Major Kellerman's voice had lost some of its earlier certainty when he finally transmitted. Venom 1 to Overlord. Flight consensus indicates mission intelligence may require reevaluation. 4 against the machine. 4 human consciences against institutional inertia. For a moment, suspended between sky and earth, it seemed like conscience might actually win. The moment shattered when Overlord's next transmission came through with the cold authority of absolute command. Venom Flight, you are relieved. Predator drones inbound to execute target package. Clear the area immediately or face charges of mutiny. Unmanned systems. Remote killing machines operated by people who would never see the faces of their victims, never hear their last words, never carry the weight of their deaths. The drones would complete the mission without the inconvenience of human conscience, reducing the medical personnel below to statistics in after-action reports. Kinsley felt something break inside her chest, not her resolve, but her faith in the institution she'd served for more than 2 decades. The military that had shaped her, trained her, and given meaning to her life was preparing to murder innocent people rather than admit its intelligence had been flawed. Dr. Valdez, she transmitted on guard frequency, you need to move your people immediately. Get everyone at least 1 kilometer northeast of your current position. Military aircraft inbound to your location. She couldn't tell the medical team about the impending drone strike directly. That would constitute treason under military law. But she could provide enough information for intelligent people to draw their own conclusions and take appropriate action. The response came quickly. Air Force Rescue, we have critical patients who cannot be moved. Can you provide emergency evacuation? Kinsley stared at her fuel gauges, calculated flight time to the nearest coalition base, and weighed the physics of rescue against the certainty of court-martial. Her F-22 wasn't designed for personnel recovery. It was a single-seat air superiority fighter built for killing other aircraft, not saving lives. But 23 years of military aviation had taught her that impossible was just another word for difficult with higher stakes. Negative on evacuation capability, she transmitted, but I can provide cover and communication relay. Give me your exact status and number of personnel requiring assistance. As Dr. Valdez provided details about their situation, 6 medical personnel, 2 critical patients, limited mobility, Kinsley began formulating a plan that violated approximately 17 different military regulations and would almost certainly end her career. But careers were temporary constructs. Human lives were permanent losses. The tactical frequency buzzed with increasingly urgent transmissions from Overlord, demanding compliance with withdrawal orders and threatening various forms of military justice. But the 4 F-22s maintained their positions above the crash site, creating a protective umbrella of American air power that shielded 6 innocent people from their own government's weapons. In the distance, barely visible against the darkening sky, Kinsley caught the distinctive silhouette of approaching Predator drones. Unmanned, unfeeling, unstoppable instruments of policy decisions made by people who would sleep peacefully tonight while others counted bodies in the morning. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. 4 manned fighters against however many drones Overlord had authorized for the strike mission. The F-22s possessed superior performance and firepower, but engaging American military assets would constitute an act of mutiny punishable by life imprisonment or death. Venom flight, final warning, Overlord transmitted. Withdraw immediately or face hostile engagement protocols. Hostile engagement. They were threatening to shoot down American pilots for protecting civilian medical personnel. The institution Kinsley had devoted her life to serving was preparing to kill her for doing the right thing. She thought about Emma again, probably finishing homework in their quarters at Nellie's Air Force Base, waiting for her mother to return from another classified mission. What would Emma think when she learned that her mother had died in combat against her own military, killed for the crime of saving innocent lives? But what would Emma think if she learned her mother had stood by and allowed the murder of medical personnel? Because following orders was easier than following conscience. The answer crystallized in Kinsley's mind with perfect clarity. Emma would rather have a dead hero for a mother than a living coward. All Venom aircraft, Kinsley transmitted on tactical frequency. This is Matchstick Thorn. I'm engaging emergency override protocols and establishing protection detail over civilian personnel. Anyone who wants to return to base and avoid court-martial proceedings has my full understanding and support. No judgment, no questions asked. The radio silence stretched for exactly 10 seconds, long enough for 3 other pilots to weigh their careers against their consciences, their futures against their principles, their personal safety against their obligation to protect the innocent. Marcus Morrison was the first to respond. Sledge staying on station. Civilians need protection. Then Phoenix Rodriguez. Phoenix concurs. Medical personnel are non-combatants under Geneva Conventions. Finally, Major Kellerman's voice, heavy with the weight of career-ending decision. Venom 1 remains committed to civilian protection protocols. 4 against the machine. 4 human beings willing to sacrifice everything they'd worked for to prevent the murder of 6 strangers, whose only crime was trying to help wounded people in a war zone. The Predator drones appeared on their radar screens like mechanical vultures, closing in on the crash site with remorseless precision. In 10 minutes, they would be within weapons range. In 15, they would reduce the medical team to vapor and memory. Unless 4 F-22 Raptor pilots decided that some things were worth dying for. Kinsley armed her weapons systems and prepared to make the hardest decision of her military career, whether to fire on American military assets to protect American values. The irony was bitter enough to taste, metallic and sharp like blood in her mouth. "Dr. Valdez," she transmitted, "you need to know that hostile aircraft are approaching your position. We will do everything possible to protect your people, but I cannot guarantee your safety. Do you have any way to move your critical patients?" The response carried the weight of impossible choices. Negative, rescue aircraft. Moving our patients will kill them. We stay with our wounded. Medical personnel willing to die for their patients. Military pilots willing to die to protect medical personnel. And somewhere in an air-conditioned bunker, officers willing to kill everyone involved rather than admit their intelligence was wrong. The math of heroism had never been more complex or more simple. Kinsley selected air-to-air missiles on her weapons panel and locked onto the lead Predator drone. The targeting system painted the unmanned aircraft with invisible radar energy, calculating intercept vectors and optimal firing solutions with mechanical precision. Her finger found the trigger, a piece of metal and plastic that held the weight of mutiny and salvation in equal measure. "All Venom aircraft, weapons hot," she transmitted. "Prepare to engage hostile drones approaching civilian medical personnel." The responses came immediately, professional and resigned. Venom 2, weapons hot. Venom 4, weapons hot. Venom 1, weapons hot and ready. 4 American fighter pilots, preparing to shoot down American military assets to protect foreign medical personnel from American weapons. The situation had passed beyond irony into the realm of tragic necessity. The Predator drones maintained their approach, following programmed flight paths toward predetermined target coordinates. They couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be appealed to, couldn't be made to see the difference between combatants and healers. They were perfect instruments of institutional will, uncomplicated by conscience or doubt. In 2 minutes, they would enter weapons range. In 3 minutes, the first Hellfire missiles would begin their terminal descent toward 6 people whose only crime was wearing the wrong uniform in the wrong place at the wrong time. Kinsley's finger tightened on the trigger as she prepared to cross the line between soldier and rebel, between following orders and following the deeper oath she'd sworn to protect innocent life, wherever she found it. The radio crackled with one final transmission from Overlord, carrying the full weight of military authority and institutional power. Venom Flight, you are hereby ordered to withdraw immediately. Failure to comply will result in engagement by coalition forces. This is your final warning. Coalition forces. They were going to send Allied aircraft to shoot down American pilots who were trying to protect medical personnel. The situation had devolved beyond military logic into the realm of bureaucratic madness, where protecting innocent life was treated as an act of treason. Kinsley stared through her canopy at the desert below, where 6 small heat signatures huddled around a crashed aircraft, waiting to discover whether the night sky would bring salvation or death. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity. 4 human consciences against the entire military-industrial complex. She keyed her radio one final time. Overlord, this is Major Kinsley Thorne, Service Number 1847, Delta November. I am exercising moral override under military law to protect non-combatant medical personnel from unlawful targeting. Any action taken against civilian medical staff will be reported as war crimes under the Geneva Convention. The silence that followed carried the weight of burning bridges and transformed allegiances. Somewhere in the chain of command, lawyers were probably frantically consulting regulations and precedents, trying to determine whether shooting down their own pilots constituted a public relations nightmare or a necessary enforcement action. But in the cockpit of Venom 3, Major Kinsley, Matchstick, Thorne was no longer thinking about regulations or career consequences. She was thinking about Emma, about the military her daughter would inherit, about the difference between following orders and following the deeper obligations that made military service meaningful. The Predator drones entered weapons range with mechanical precision, their sensors locking onto targets that couldn't distinguish between combatants and casualties, between enemies and angels of mercy. Kinsley's finger found the trigger, and prepared to write the final chapter of her military career in fire and principle. The first Hellfire missile streaked away from the lead Predator drone, a precise instrument of remote killing painted against the desert stars. It would reach the medical personnel in exactly 47 seconds, reducing 6 lives to vapor and institutional convenience. Unless a certain Air Force major decided that some bridges were worth burning. Kinsley's AIM-120 AMRAAM missile leaped from her weapons bay with the fury of violated principles, racing across the night sky toward the drone that had dared to target healers under her protection. The missile's radar seeker locked onto the Predator with mechanical certainty, calculating intercept vectors, while Kinsley calculated the cost of mutiny. "Splash 1 Predator," she transmitted as her missile found its target, transforming the drone into a brief fireball against the star-scattered darkness. Medical personnel remain under protection. The 3 remaining Predator drones adjusted their flight paths with algorithmic precision, spreading out to complicate intercept solutions while maintaining their terminal approach toward the crash site. Their weapons systems tracked multiple targets simultaneously, the medical personnel below and the rebellious F-22s above. The machines couldn't feel confusion or moral conflict. They simply recalculated optimal targeting solutions and continued their programmed mission. Multiple missile launches, Phoenix Rodriguez called out as the remaining drones ripple-fired their entire weapon loads. 6 Hellfires inbound to medical site, 4 more targeting our formation. Kinsley's tactical display painted the incoming threats with red symbols of imminent death. 10 missiles seeking 10 different targets with impartial mechanical hunger. The mathematics of point defense were brutally simple. 4 aircraft against 10 missiles, with 6 civilian lives hanging in the balance. "All Venom aircraft, defensive spread," she commanded, banking hard to evade the missiles targeting her while simultaneously launching countermeasures. Chaff and flare dispensers painted the night sky with metallic clouds and burning decoys, creating false targets to seduce incoming weapons away from their intended victims. But point defense was a numbers game, and the numbers were wrong. 2 of the Hellfires targeting the medical site punched through the electronic countermeasures, their seeker heads locked onto the heat signatures of 6 human beings who had chosen to stay with wounded patients rather than flee to safety. The missiles descended with mechanical precision, indifferent to the moral complexity of their targets. Kinsley made a decision that violated every principle of air combat tactics and personal survival. She placed her F-22 directly between the incoming missiles and the medical team below, using her aircraft as a human shield to protect people she'd never met and would probably never see again. The first Hellfire missile struck her starboard wing root, its shaped charge warhead designed to penetrate tank armor, easily breaching the composite structure of her aircraft. The explosion sent her Raptor tumbling through the desert air, hydraulic systems failing and flight controls responding sluggishly to her inputs. The second missile missed by less than 50 feet, detonating against the ground near the medical site and showering the area with superheated fragments. Through her damaged canopy, Kinsley could see the medical personnel taking cover behind their crashed aircraft, apparently uninjured but definitely aware that they were under attack by their supposed rescuers. "Venom 3 is hit," she transmitted, fighting to maintain control as warning lights illuminated her cockpit like a malevolent Christmas tree. "Aircraft severely damaged but still airborne. Medical site appears secure." Her 3 wingmen had successfully evaded the missiles targeting them, but the cost of protecting the medical team had been severe. Kinsley's F-22 was hemorrhaging fuel, hydraulic fluid, and control authority with each passing second. The mathematics of powered flight were turning against her with mechanical inevitability. "Matchstick, you need to punch out." Marcus Morrison's voice carried the weight of professional concern and personal friendship. "Your bird is dying around you." Kinsley stared at her instrument panel, watching systems fail in cascade as her aircraft slowly transformed from magnificent flying machine into expensive falling debris. The ejection seat would carry her away from immediate danger, but it would also leave the medical personnel without protection from whatever follow-up strikes Overlord might authorize. "Negative, Sledge," she replied, adjusting her flight path to maintain position above the crash site despite her aircraft's protests. "Medical site still needs protection. I can hold position for a few more minutes." The tactical frequency erupted with protests from her wingmen and increasingly urgent demands for compliance from various command centers. But Kinsley filtered out the noise and focused on the essential mathematics of the situation. Her damaged aircraft was burning fuel at twice the normal rate, which gave her approximately 12 minutes of flight time before flameout forced an emergency landing. The nearest coalition base was 15 minutes away at best speed. She wasn't going home tonight. But 6 medical personnel might see another sunrise, because one Air Force pilot decided that protecting innocent life was more important than protecting expensive government property. "Dr. Valdez," she transmitted on guard frequency, "this is your Air Force escort. Hostile drones have been neutralized, but there may be additional threats inbound. What's your status on moving patients?" The response came quickly. "Air Force Rescue, we've managed to stabilize our critical patients sufficiently for short-distance movement. Can you guide us to a safe landing zone for medical evacuation?" Kinsley consulted her moving map display, looking for terrain features that might accommodate a medical helicopter while keeping the personnel away from potential targeting zones. Her aircraft's navigation systems were failing intermittently, but she could still identify a flat area approximately 2 kilometers northeast of the crash site, far enough from the original target coordinates to avoid collateral damage from any follow-up strikes. Copy, Dr. Valdez. I can guide you to an evacuation point, but you'll need to move quickly. My aircraft is damaged, and I may not be able to provide protection much longer. As the medical team began their careful movement across the desert terrain, carrying their wounded on improvised stretchers, Kinsley circled overhead like a damaged guardian angel. Her F-22 was leaving a trail of vapor and debris across the starlit sky, but it was still flying, still protecting, still fulfilling the deeper mission that transcended written orders. The radio crackled with intermittent transmissions from various command authorities, but Kinsley ignored most of them. Her world had narrowed to the essential elements: 6 people moving slowly across the desert sand, 3 wingmen maintaining protective formation despite career-ending consequences, and 1 dying aircraft held together by a will and determination rather than engineering principles. 8 minutes of fuel remaining. Venom Flight, this is Rescue 21. A new voice cut through the tactical frequency. Army medical evacuation inbound to grid coordinates provided by Venom 3. ETA 12 minutes. Medical helicopter. Someone in the chain of command had decided that saving lives was more important than punishing insubordination, at least temporarily. The medical personnel would be evacuated safely, which meant Kinsley's sacrifice of aircraft and career hadn't been wasted. Copy, Rescue 21, she replied. Medical personnel are moving to designated LZ. Area appears secure from ground threats. She didn't mention the possibility of additional drone strikes or follow-up targeting orders. Military helicopters were valuable assets, and their crews deserved honest tactical information rather than false reassurance. But she also didn't want to discourage the rescue mission that would finally get the medical team to safety. 6 minutes of fuel remaining. Below her, the medical personnel had reached the designated landing zone and were setting up a perimeter around their wounded patients. Dr. Valdez had proven herself to be not only medically competent, but tactically aware. The team's defensive positions would provide maximum protection during helicopter landing procedures, while maintaining clear egress routes if the situation deteriorated. Matchstick, Phoenix Rodriguez's voice carried an unusual emotional undertone. You've got multiple aircraft inbound from the northeast. Fast movers, probably F-16s. Coalition forces. Overlord was sending fighter aircraft to enforce compliance with withdrawal orders, which meant the window for medical evacuation was rapidly closing. The incoming F-16s would have orders to force the rebellious F-22s away from the area, probably using whatever means necessary to restore command authority. 4 minutes of fuel remaining. All Venom aircraft, Kinsley transmitted. Medical evacuation helicopter inbound to LZ. We need to maintain protection until Rescue 21 completes patient pickup. After that, anyone who wants to return to base has my full understanding. The responses came immediately, each pilot acknowledging their commitment to see the mission through to completion regardless of personal consequences. 3 men who had chosen to follow a female pilot into mutiny because she'd seen something they'd missed. The difference between following orders and following principle. Venom 3, this is Venom 1. Major Kellerman's voice carried newfound respect. Your call on the rescue pattern was correct. Whatever happens next, you saved 6 lives tonight. Kinsley felt something warm expand in her chest. Not pride exactly, but the satisfaction of knowing that 23 years of military service had culminated in something genuinely meaningful. She'd spent decades following orders, completing missions, and serving institutional objectives. Tonight, she'd finally served something higher. 2 minutes of fuel remaining. The Army medical helicopter appeared on her radar, approaching the landing zone with practiced precision, while the 4 F-22s maintained protective overwatch. In the distance, the coalition F-16s were closing rapidly, their pilots probably receiving increasingly urgent orders to terminate the unauthorized protection mission. Everything was coming together in a convergence of timing, courage, and desperate hope. 6 medical personnel who'd stayed with their wounded. 4 fighter pilots who'd chosen conscience over career. 1 Army helicopter crew willing to fly into a contested area to save strangers. And somewhere in the chain of command, at least one person with enough authority to authorize the rescue mission, despite institutional objections. 1 minute of fuel remaining. Rescue 21 on final approach to LZ, the helicopter pilot transmitted. Medical personnel in sight, preparing for rapid pickup. Kinsley watched through her failing instruments as the helicopter settled onto the desert sand, its rotor wash creating swirling dust clouds that temporarily obscured the loading operation. But she could see enough to know that Dr. Valdez and her team were efficiently transferring their wounded patients into the helicopter's medical compartment with professional speed and competence. 30 seconds of fuel remaining. Her F-22's engines began their death throes, compressor stalls and temperature spikes indicating imminent flameout. The aircraft that had carried her through this impossible mission was finally succumbing to battle damage and fuel starvation, but it had lasted exactly long enough to complete the task she demanded of it. "All Venom aircraft, this is Matchstick," she transmitted as her engines wound down toward silence. "Medical personnel are secure. Mission accomplished. It's been an honor flying with all of you." The tactical frequency filled with acknowledgments and expressions of mutual respect. But Kinsley was no longer listening to radio traffic. She was preparing for emergency landing procedures in a damaged aircraft with no power, no hydraulics, and no guarantee of survival. But 6 people were alive who wouldn't have been without her intervention. 6 strangers who would see another sunrise, because one Air Force pilot had recognized the difference between lawful orders and moral obligation. The mathematics of heroism had never been more clear. Kinsley's F-22 descended toward the desert floor in silence, its engines finally exhausted after carrying her through 23 years of military service and one final act of principled rebellion. Through her canopy, she could see the medical helicopter lifting off with its precious cargo, carrying 6 lives to safety, while 4 fighter pilots faced uncertain futures for doing the right thing. Her landing gear deployed partially. The hydraulic systems were too damaged to guarantee full extension, but enough function remained to provide some cushioning for the inevitable ground contact. The desert sand would be unforgiving, but survivable if she managed the approach correctly. 3,000 feet above terrain. Venom 3, eject immediately. Marcus Morrison's voice carried the urgency of someone watching a friend face death. Your aircraft is not controllable for landing. Kinsley considered the ejection option, weighing the certainty of survival against her stubborn determination to bring her aircraft home. The F-22 had served faithfully through this impossible mission, absorbing missile damage and continuing to fly when lesser machines would have disintegrated. She owed it the respect of a controlled landing rather than abandonment. 2,000 feet above terrain. But more than mechanical loyalty was involved in her decision. Every military pilot understood that ejection meant the complete loss of their aircraft, usually followed by lengthy investigations into pilot judgment and adherence to emergency procedures. A controlled landing, even a damaged one, preserved both aircraft and pilot for possible future service. Not that Kinsley expected to have a future in military aviation after tonight's events. Mutiny charges would end her career regardless of outcome, but she could at least demonstrate proper airmanship during her final flight as an Air Force pilot. 1,000 feet above terrain. The desert rushed upward with geological inevitability, sand and rock formations resolving into individual obstacles that could transform a survivable landing into fatal impact. Kinsley selected the flattest available area, a stretch of hard-packed sand between 2 rocky outcroppings that would accommodate her aircraft's wounded glide path. 500 feet above terrain. Her F-22 responded sluggishly to control inputs, but enough authority remained to guide the aircraft toward her chosen landing zone. The partial landing gear would provide some cushioning, while the aircraft's belly would absorb the remaining impact energy through controlled structural deformation. Modern military aircraft were designed to protect their pilots during emergency landings, assuming the pilot maintained consciousness and control throughout the critical final seconds. 200 feet above terrain. All stations, Venom 3 attempting emergency landing, she transmitted as her aircraft crossed the threshold between flight and ground contact. Aircraft is controllable but severely damaged. Stand by for impact. The responses came in a cascade of concerned voices, but Kinsley was no longer processing radio communications. Her entire world had narrowed to the essential elements of emergency landing procedures: airspeed control, attitude maintenance, and ground contact preparation. 50 feet above terrain. Her F-22 settled onto the desert sand with surprising gentleness, the partial landing gear absorbing the initial impact before collapsing in controlled failure. The aircraft's belly scraped across the sand with metallic protests, but the deceleration remained within survivable parameters as momentum gradually transferred from forward motion to heat and debris. Ground contact. Kinsley felt the massive deceleration forces press her into her ejection seat as her aircraft slid across the desert floor, shedding velocity and structural integrity in equal measure. Warning lights illuminated her cockpit in brilliant cascades as electrical systems failed, and fuel vapors created potential fire hazards throughout the airframe. But she was alive, conscious, and mobile as her F-22 finally came to rest in a cloud of sand and superheated metal. The aircraft that had carried her through this impossible mission had delivered her safely to the ground despite catastrophic damage and complete system failure. Emergency ground egress procedures activated automatically as Kinsley unstrapped from her ejection seat and prepared to evacuate her aircraft before fuel vapors could ignite. Her emergency locator beacon was already transmitting position coordinates to search and rescue centers, while her personal survival radio provided communication capability with overhead aircraft. Venom Flight, this is Venom 3, she transmitted as she climbed from her cockpit. Pilot safely on ground. Aircraft is total loss but no injuries sustained. Medical evacuation helicopter has successfully departed with all personnel. The responses came immediately from her 3 wingmen, expressing relief at her survival and continued commitment to providing protective overwatch until ground rescue forces could reach her position. They had followed her into mutiny and would apparently follow her through the consequences as well. Kinsley stood beside her destroyed F-22, watching the medical helicopter disappear into the distance with its cargo of saved lives. The aircraft that had defined her identity for 23 years was now an expensive pile of classified debris scattered across the desert sand. But 6 people were alive who wouldn't have been without her intervention. The mathematics seemed favorable. Matchstick, this is Sledge. Marcus Morrison's voice carried a complex mixture of admiration and concern. Ground rescue is inbound your position. How are you holding up?